Welcome back to the Book of Souls, Trilogy, The Autobiography of Daegan Sheehan, Chapter 10, The Off-the-Shelf Enterprise, Cocaine and Politics. Today, I'll be interviewing my father, Daegan Sheehan, Harvard Attorney of Law.
Okay, this is an event that took place back between 1972 and 1973. This is a series of events that took place when Richard Nixon was still president. He had been elected in 1968 when Robert Kennedy was assassinated, and therefore was eliminated from the Democratic Party race for president. Hubert Humphrey took over and ran against Richard Nixon, who was running for president in 1968, and Nixon had won. So he was president from 1968 until 1972, and he was getting ready to run for his second term in November of 1972. A series of events took place in that summer, in June of 1972. Turned out that while Richard Nixon was president, in running for re-election in 1972 against Gene McCarthy, the Democratic senator from South Dakota, or from Minnesota, I think he was. No, I'm sorry, he was running against George McGovern. He was running against George McGovern, who was the Democratic senator from South Dakota. And that election was going forward, the campaign was going forward, when suddenly in June of 1972, in the summer, approaching the later November election, there was a burglary in the Democratic National Headquarters in Washington, D.C. And 4 men were arrested in the Watergate Hotel. There were 3 Cuban guys, and a 4th guy was an American by the name of James McCord, who was the CIA wiretapping specialist for the American Central Intelligence Agency, recently retired, but he was arrested in the Watergate Hotel, and a huge scandal broke out. Not immediately, not right after the June burglary. There were newspaper accounts covering it, but it kind of died down. And the election went forward. And later, that was in June of 1972. But then when the election came in November, Richard Nixon won and took office again for his second term in the beginning of in November of 1972. Okay, so what happened is that at that time, he was very, very much of a supporter for the war in Vietnam, and he had carried on the war throughout his first term between 1968 and 1972, and he was still maintaining the Vietnam War in his second term in the beginning of after the November election, 1972. And what happened is 2 things started happening simultaneously. One is that the wheels started coming off the burglary after Richard Nixon had already been elected and had succeeded in quelling any kind of major news story about it until after he was elected in November. But as December of 72 and in January of 1973 came on, the wheels started coming off the cover-up, and stories started being published in the Washington Times by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein about the burglary and Richard Nixon's potential involvement. So that the Nixon administration started becoming quite unstable at that point. And at the same time, over in Vietnam, the CIA station chief who was functioning in Vietnam under the Nixon administration, both administrations. Anyway, he began to be investigated in Saigon because he was running a totally illegal and unconstitutional political assassination program in Southeast Asia, known as the Phoenix Program. And he had organized that earlier when he was the CIA station chief in Laos, but he's now the station chief in Saigon. And he is in charge of the Phoenix Program, which has assassinated over 20,000 non-combatant civilians, school teachers, town mayors, clerks in towns around who the CIA deemed not adequately loyal to the South Vietnamese government of Neo Dinh Diem at that time. Bottom line is Theodore Shackley, the station chief in Saigon, CIA station chief, ordered the assassination of Prince Suvarnabhumi, who was the neutralist prince in Indonesia. And there was a major tussle going on between the fascists and the socialists in the elections in Indonesia. And Prince Suvarnabhumi was sort of a neutralist. He wasn't leaning more toward being inclined to have relations with Russia or inclined in having exclusive relationships with the Western powers. Bottom line is that Theodore Shackley and the people in the Southeast Asia CIA station viewed that as being inadequately supportive of an ardently anti-communist government. And so Theodore Shackley ordered him to be murdered, assassinated, because that was part of the things that he did running the Phoenix Program. And he assigned a group of 6 U.S. Army Special Forces guys to kill Prince Suvarnabhumi. And what happened is suddenly the members of the 16-person U.S. Army Green Beret team that were going to be assigned to kill Prince Suvarnabhumi, one of their associates, a South Korean CIA operative, was discovered to be having his mistress. His mistress turns out to have been the mistress also of a North Vietnamese general. And this caused Theodore Shackley to believe that there was a huge danger that this young CIA, South Vietnamese CIA guy, may have heard about through the group that he was friends with, that this group of 6 guys that were assigned to assassinate Prince Suvarnabhumi, he may have heard about this, and therefore he became a security leak, possibly to his mistress, therefore through to the North Vietnamese general. And so Shackley ordered him to be assassinated. In fact, ordered the guy among the 6 people that were friends of his, the guy that was his best friend out of all those, to be the one to pull the trigger to kill him. And they kidnapped the young South Vietnamese CIA operative, kidnapped him, dragged him out in a boat, tied him up, and his friend among them was ordered to put 5 slugs in the back of his head, 45 slugs, and to make sure he was dead, and then put chains around him and dumped his body into a lake in Vietnam, and then left him there. And as the weeks went by, this young man started feeling more and more and more guilty about what he had done, and he actually went and turned himself in to Creighton Abrams, General Creighton Abrams, who was the commanding general of the United States forces in Vietnam at the time. And Creighton Abrams began a major investigation for court-martialing all 6 of these guys who'd been involved in killing this person, this South Vietnamese agent. and they were tracking down, leading to Shackley, who was the CIA station chief who had ordered them to be killed. And so Shackley was removed suddenly as the CIA station chief in Saigon, and was taken out of Saigon. And the guy that was appointed, handpicked by Shackley to replace him, was a guy by the name of Tom Polgar. And Shackley left, was shuttled out of Vietnam in a hurry and brought out of the jurisdiction of Creighton Abrams and brought to the United States, back to Langley, where he actually temporarily chaired the CIA's Israeli desk. Temporarily, from like July, August of 1972, coincidentally just following by a month the burglary in Washington, but they called him back to Washington, and he temporarily chaired the Israeli desk, but he was eventually made the CIA station chief in Mexico City. Because it turns out that Mexico City was the base where the political assassination operations were being run in South America against, social communists, obviously, socialists, liberals, people who read more than 2 books a year. That the oligarchs in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua and other places were disappearing people by the thousands, literally. And they were assassination teams that were being run by the Central Intelligence Agency in cooperation with death squads inside those military dictatorships. Bottom line is they had an operation, the CIA, based in Mexico City, inside the security department of the Mexican National Oil Company called Pemex, the head of which was Jorge Diaz Serrano. And it turns out Jorge Diaz Serrano, who was the head of the Pemex National Oil Corporation in Mexico City, was the former business partner of George H.W. Bush in the Zapata Oil Corporation in Houston, Texas. But that base down in Mexico City, inside the Pemex Corporation, inside the security department, is where the assassins were concealed. Rafael Chichi Quintero, Ricardo Chavez, Rolando Martinez, the Villaverde brothers, etc. They were there in the security department. And Mexico City was sort of the rat's nest, where the Central Intelligence Agency, out of their main office in Mexico City, ran the death squads in Operation Condor and other operations all through Central and Latin America and South America. And so that was a very important position. And when Shackley was dragged out of, under emergency circumstances, out of Saigon, to get him out of the crosshairs of Creighton Abrams, brought him back to Washington, and then sent him down to become sent him down to become the head of Western Hemisphere operations, to run all CIA operations in the entire Western Hemisphere. And what Theodore Shackley did, the first thing he did when he became the Western Hemisphere operations director for the CIA, is he replaced all of the CIA station chiefs that were already in place throughout all of South America and Central America and Western Hemisphere operations, and put all of his people in, saying that I think Frank Snepp, did he write on Company Business? Was it Frank Snepp? I think it was. No, this was Phil Agee. That's it. On the Company Business, it was called. He asserted that since Phil Agee was getting set to write a book exposing a lot of the activities of the CIA, that he had to remove all the station chiefs and put in his own people. So he did. And he removed the CIA station chief in Mexico City, a fellow named Scott. And he removed him, and he replaced him with Tom Polgar. the same guy that they brought in to take his place in Saigon earlier in mid-1972. He brings him in 1973 to be the CIA station chief in Mexico City. And I'll tell you shortly in a moment how it is I know all of this in detail. I can assure you I do, and I'll tell you why I do in a minute. But here's the event that actually happened. What happened is that when Tom Polgar comes in September, October of 1973, this is now almost a year after Richard Nixon has been reelected in November of 1972. So like in September of 1973, Theodore Shackley has become the CIA Western Hemisphere Operations Director, and he's appointed Tom Polgar to be the new Mexico City station chief. And Tom Polgar comes into the office of his deputy CIA station chief in Mexico City, a man by the name of Joseph Burkholder Smith, his name is. Tom Polgar comes into Joseph Burkholder Smith's office, and he says, Joe, I don't know if I'm going to be able to leave you on here as my deputy here in the CIA station in Mexico City. There's going to be a guy coming to see you tomorrow morning, 10ish in the morning. You'll recognize who he is, he said, and he's going to ask you some questions. You don't have to answer the questions, but you know your answers to the questions will really control whether you're going to be left on here as the deputy CIA station chief in Mexico City. And he said, so you can decide whether you want to answer his questions or not. And so the next morning, into Joseph Burkholder Smith's office in the CIA station in Mexico City, in walks Nasser Haro. Nasser Haro is the Mexican head of the DFS. The DFS in Mexico is like the FBI and the CIA together is here in the United States. And Nasser Haro walks into the office and says to him, he says, Joe, he said, it's not clear that Polgar is going to be able to keep you on here as his deputy CIA station chief in Mexico City. But, you know, there's some people I'd like to have you meet and talk with, and they may have some questions for you. You don't have to answer their questions, he said, but, you know, your answers to those questions will control whether you're going to be allowed to be left on here as the deputy CIA station chief in Mexico City. And so Polgar says, okay, so I'm going to go with him, right? So he goes with him. He goes with Nasser Haro. Nasser Haro takes him out of the office, downstairs into this sedan, this big Suburban with smoke-tinted windows. They drive away, and they go to the Mexico City airport. And this is September of 1973. Richard Nixon is still in the presidency. He's under siege in Washington, D.C. Major stories being printed in the Washington Post about his involvement potentially in the Watergate burglary, etc. But the bottom line is Theodore Shackley is ensconced now as the Western Hemisphere Director for CIA operations. He's got Tom Polgar in the CIA station chief position in Mexico City, and here's Joseph Burkholder Smith. He's been being told he may not be left on as the deputy unless he answers these questions. So he goes with Nasser Haro. They go right to the Mexico City airport, go all around security, don't go through any security, get into a Learjet, and they fly away together. And they fly for this longest distance, and finally they land in this Learjet, and it turns out they're in Buenos Aires in Argentina, having flown there from Mexico City. And they get out of the Learjet, and they go over and they get into a major helicopter. They get in the helicopter, Nasser Haro and Joseph Burkholder Smith, and they fly away. And they fly way up north in Argentina, north of Buenos Aires, up to the northwesternmost corner of Argentina, where 5 different countries all come together up there. and they land on this soccer field up in that corner in a little town called Salta. And the helicopter lands in what looks like a big soccer field, and Nasser Haro gets out of the helicopter, and Joseph Burkholder Smith follows him across this soccer field, and up this big embankment, and they get up on top of the embankment, and he looks over the embankment, and he says he thought he was in Bavaria. There was this kind of Bavarian, kind of German-looking little town down in this little valley. So they walk down into this little village, and Nasser Haro leads him into this Bavarian inn that's in this little town of Salta. And they walk into this inn, and there in the big room in the inn is a big oaken table, in front of a big stone fireplace. And sitting at the table are these 6 men. And Nasser Haro leads Joseph Burkholder Smith over and sits him down in the chair, facing these 6 guys on the other side of the table. And the guy in the middle says to Joseph Burkholder Smith, he said, "Joe, it's not clear that you're going to be left on as the deputy to Tom Polgar, in the Mexico station, CIA station." And he said, "We want to make sure that we have established a very major cocaine cartel out of Colombia that is going to be smuggling major amounts of cocaine into the United States, in a portion of the money that is generated by the sale of this cocaine in the United States through this Colombian cocaine cartel we've set up is going to be used to help finance our war without boundaries against your enemies and ours." And Joseph Burkholder Smith looks up, and over the mantle, the stone fireplace, over the mantle is a large swastika flag of a Nazi, like World War II Nazi swastika flag of the fascists, right? And Burkholder Smith says to me, he's telling me the story, right? And he says, "Oh, and look," he says, "I swear to God, Dan," he said, "I don't know what I'd ever done in my whole life that would have led them to think I would have gone along with that." And I said, "Well, probably because, just to start with, you're being the CIA station chief in Mexico City," I said, And he said to Dick Billings, who was sitting at the table, the guy who introduced him to me. Dick Billings was anyway, I'll tell you Dick Billings was. So he turns to Dick Billings and says, "Gee, I thought this guy was going to be on our side of this." And Billings said, "Look, I just met him, and I'm introducing him to you." But so the bottom line is, this guy Joseph Burkholder Smith, who's telling me this story, gets up, walks around the table, and sticks his hand out to me. And I reached up and shook his hand. He looks me in the eye and he said, "I just wanted to make sure if you're going to be dealing with Ted Shackley, you know who you're really dealing with." Right? So the clear, not only inference, but explicit point of the story is that we, through our Central Intelligence Agency down in Mexico City, where we were running a major political assassination operation in South America, codenamed Operation Condor, were working directly with the Colombian cocaine cartel that were using part of their income from the sale of cocaine through that cartel going into the United States. They were using portions of that money to fund their, quote, war without boundaries against their enemies and those of the Central Intelligence Agency that were mainly the forces of democracy and human rights down through South America, who were opposing the major oligarchs that were just hardcore fascists, in fact, a progeny of the Nazis that had escaped from Germany at the end of World War II. It had come down in, had escaped and been brought to Argentina and Brazil and Chile and Guatemala and El Salvador. That's where those kind of fascist regimes really originated, because those Nazis that had escaped from Germany became advisors to certain elements inside the military in those countries, and ended up overthrowing their democratically elected governments and coming to power. And that's the basis of those fascist countries down through South America that I just mentioned. It's Argentina and Brazil and Chile, El Salvador and Guatemala. That's the story. How I found out about this, just for the sake of veracity on this, it's bottom line is, I was in 1975, just like 2 years later, 1975, I was general counsel for the United States Jesuit Order headquarters in Washington, D.C., in their National Social Ministry Office, which is their public policy office. And it was in that context that we had filed a major federal criminal racketeering act lawsuit against the off-the-shelf enterprise of Oliver North and Richard Secord and Albert Hakim and Dewey Claridge and Theodore Shackley. Among others, there were 29 of the defendants that we named as conducting violations of the Boland Amendment that had been passed by Congress in 1984 in April, prohibiting the Reagan-Bush administration and any other federal executive branch administration. This is the law passed by Congress, prohibiting them from providing any kind of military support, either direct or indirect, or any kind of financial support to the Contras, who were the former National Guard commanders of the Nicaraguan fascist government under Anastasio Somoza. This is a little complicated, but the bottom line is we had the United States Congress had passed a law prohibiting the Reagan-Bush administration or any other administration from providing any aid to the exile fascist leader of Nicaragua, Anastasio Somoza, who had fallen from power in the face of a revolution in Nicaragua led by the Sandinista against them. And the bottom line is, because the Contras, this Nicaraguan National Guard people, who were the military for Anastasio Somoza, the dictator, because they had been ousted from power and had been driven out of Nicaragua, they had mounted a paramilitary and terrorist set of attacks against the Nicaraguan Sandinista government. And the United States Congress passed a law prohibiting the Central Intelligence Agency or any of the government agency in the executive branch from giving any aid, direct or indirect, to the Contras, because the Contras had been caught mining the international harbors in Nicaragua, and it's against international law to place landmines in international harbors. Strangely enough, it's just true, and they got caught doing it, and so the United States Congress passed a law prohibiting the executive branch of Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. from providing any military aid to the Contras. And it turns out that we had discovered that at Jesuit headquarters, we discovered that they were violating the Boland Amendment. That was the sponsor of the bill in the House of Representatives, was Richard Boland. So they called it the Boland Amendment. And this was the law that prohibited any kind of support for those people. And we had discovered at Jesuit headquarters that they were violating it, and we filed a major federal criminal racketeering act lawsuit against the 29 members of that enterprise who were working very closely with Oliver North, who was the deputy director of the National Security Council in the White House under the Reagan-Bush administration. He was the deputy assistant, he was the deputy director of the National Security Council in charge of anti-terrorism, Oliver North. So the bottom line is we had caught them, and we had filed the complaint against them. And one afternoon or late morning, I'd been at meetings over on Capitol Hill, and I came back into my office, and my secretary, Patty Austin, 1324 North Capitol Street, just blocks, you could see out of my office window, you could see the Capitol Dome from my office right there, where we had the Jesuit National Headquarters had a sub office over there on Capitol Hill, the base of Capitol Hill. And so I was coming back into the office, and my secretary, Patty Austin, says, Danny, there's an elderly man here who's come here to see you. And I said, this is May of 1973, okay? And it's like either May 30th or June 1st or 2nd, like that, of 1973. No. This is 75. This is later. I'm talking. This is 1986, in fact. So 1986, much later. Okay. So I'm in the office, and Dick Billings, she says, there's this elderly man who's here to see you. And I said, well, who is it? And she said, I don't know. He didn't give me his name. And I said, well, where is he? And she said, he's upstairs in your office. I'm waiting for you. And so I said, okay. So I go upstairs to my office, and here's this elderly guy. He looks like he's maybe 65, 70 years old. And he's like in mufti, they call it. He's got khaki pants with big khaki pockets. He's got a khaki shirt with like a fishing vest on with like about 20 little pockets in it, and he's got this hemp knapsack under his arm, like a little handbag like. And I go over to him, and I stick out my hand and say, hi, I'm Danny Sheehan. And he sticks his hand out and says, hi, good to meet you, Mr. Sheehan. And so he sits back down, and I go over and get behind my desk, and he says, I said, so what can I do? What can I do to help you? He says, well, you don't know who I am. I said, I noticed that. I said, I noticed you didn't tell me who you were. And he said, but look, he said, I've got a copy here of your complaint. And he reaches in this his little bag, and he pulls out a copy of the federal complaint that we had filed. And this is like Monday after we had filed it at 4:30 on Friday evening down in the Southern District of New York, or Southern District of Florida in Miami, right? And so he pulls out a copy of the complaint. He said, I've got a copy of your complaint here. He said, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, and you don't have to answer them, he said, but if you do, I might be able to help you with this. I said, okay, what is it? He said, now, of the 29 defendants that you've named here, who do you think is the most important of all these? And I said, oh, that's easy. I said, that's Theodore Shackley. And he said, oh, then why is that? And I said, well, some people would say that the reason why he'd be the most important of them is because he was the ADDO for the agency, the Associate Deputy Director for Operations, running covert operations worldwide under George H.W. Bush, when he was the CIA director from 1975 to 1977, under Gerald Ford. When Gerald Ford came in and took over from Richard Nixon, when he was forced to resign over the Watergate burglary, that when the story finally got told that he was directly involved with the Watergate burglary and ordering it, he had to resign. And Gerald Ford came into office, and it turns out that immediately following the Watergate hearings in front of the United States Senate in the House, there was immediately convened another set of hearings, which was the Church Committee hearings, the House and Senate, or the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse, basically. And the so-called Church Committee began investigating the Central Intelligence Agency because, as it turns out, the three Spanish guys that were in the Watergate Hotel with this James McCord. Pardon?
They were Cuban guys?
Yeah, that's right. These were they were these Cuban guys. Yeah, the Cuban guys that were in the Watergate Hotel, along with James McCord. All four of them worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, in that McCord had been the chief wiretapping specialist, and the three guys had all worked in a secret program called Operation 40, running covert operations against Cuba out of Miami. And the bottom line is, two other guys were arrested that were involved, that weren't in the hotel, but they were arrested within the next few days, because it turns out they were the ones coordinating them, and that was Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt, who were both Central Intelligence Agency people. And so that even though there wasn't a big hubbub about it when the Watergate burglary hearings were all going on, there was no questioning about why they were CIA people, what they were doing. But this next committee had been set up, and so Frank Church and the people were set up, and when the Church Committee began subpoenaing people in the CIA, the new president, Gerald Ford, appointed George H.W. Bush to be the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. And that George H.W. Bush, as the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, was handpicked to run his covert operations as the head of the CIA, Theodore Shackley. And Theodore Shackley is the one who had been, this is now 1975, yes, late 1975, and Gerald Ford nominates George H.W. Bush to be the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and George H.W. Bush picks Theodore Shackley to be, and Theodore Shackley had been the CIA station chief in Saigon that they'd had to drag out of there under the cover of night to keep him from being indicted and court-martialed, basically, by Creighton Abrams, and had been the head of the Western Hemisphere operations that ran the operations overthrowing Salvador Allende in Chile, and also leading the military junta in Argentina of the colonels against the democratically elected government down there. And Theodore Shackley was the one supervising the increased rise to power of all those fascist regimes all through South America, because he was the director of Western Hemisphere operations, right? And so I said in Theodore Shackley's in George H.W. Bush, who was his boss, who's vice president now under Ronald Reagan, his national security director for the vice president, not for President Reagan, but for Vice President Bush, is Donald P. Gregg. And Donald P. Gregg was the CIA station chief for Felix Rodriguez, and Rafael Chichi Quintero, who are the ones that are coordinating the Ilopango airlift operation of illegal weapons through El Salvador into the Contras down outside of Nicaragua. And so since that's the heart of our case, that's what we're charging them with, people would tend to think that the reason why I was suggesting the most important of these people was Theodore Shackley was that reason. And Dick Billings said, yes, but that's not the main reason why you think he's the most important? I said, no. And he said, well, why? Well, what's the reason why you think he's the most important person? And I said, because he was the Miami CIA station chief on November 22nd of 1963. Which there are a lot of people who know why that'd be so important. but that was the day on which John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dealey Plaza down in Texas on November 22nd, 1963. And so I said, that was, and Theodore Shackley had been the CIA station chief in Miami on that date. And the guy, Dick Billings, gets up out of his chair, kind of stunned, and he said, there aren't two other people in the world that would have answered that question that way. He said, and he sticks his hand out and he said, my name is Dick Billings. I was the chief of staff of the House Select Committee on Assassinations that investigated the assassination of President Kennedy. I think you and I can help each other out here. And he said, there's a man that wants to meet you right away. And I said, really? I said, who is he? He said, I can't tell you, but I'd like to have you trust me, and he wants to meet you right away. And I said, well, how about tomorrow? He said, okay. And he said, where would you like to meet? He said, so I said, let's meet at the Dubliner Cafe, like right down here at the bottom of Capitol Hill. And he said, okay, noontime tomorrow at the Dubliner. And so the next day, noontime, I walked down from 1324 North Capitol Street down 12 blocks, something down to where the Dubliner is, and there's Dick Billings out front, standing there waiting for me. And so I go over and shake his hand. We go inside, and here's this man, another guy, 65, 70-year-old guy, sitting all by himself at a table in the Dubliner Cafe. And Dick Billings walks me over to the guy and said, the guy stands up, and I say, hi, I'm Danny Sheehan. And the guy says, yeah, Joe Smith. And I said, oh, right, good. It's going to be like that, huh? And he said, no, it's true. My name is Joseph Burkholder Smith. That is my name, Joseph Smith. He said, and I was the deputy CIA station chief in Mexico City when Theodore Shackley was made the director of Western Hemisphere operations. And I said, oh, excellent. I said, good. I think you and I have a lot to talk about. And we sat down at the table at the Dubliner Cafe, this would be, let me see here. This is, I'm trying to think. This would be June 2nd or 3rd of 1973, right? And we sit down, and Joseph Burkholder Smith tells me the story. Basically, look, if you're going to be dealing with Theodore Shackley and naming him as the defendant in your case, you better know who you're really dealing with, which is the international fascist cabal that works with the Central Intelligence Agency and works with the American and Sicilian mafia and does most of the major drug smuggling coming out of Southeast Asia, the heroin smuggling through Havana, previously under Batista before the Cuban Revolution, and this is who you're dealing with. Okay, so that's how I found it. That's how Joseph Burkholder Smith made it absolutely clear by his own direct eyewitness account of the direct working of the Central Intelligence Agency directly with the fascist Nazis, basically functioning out of Argentina in Salta, and that they have the Colombian cocaine cartel that was responsible for smuggling massive tons of cocaine into the United States, helping to fund the Contra War against the Sandinistas.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.